Before the 1800s and the Civil War, the American economy was purely based on agriculture. Only in the beginnings of the 1800s, industrialism began leaving its mark on the nation. The beginnings of this industrial revolution, though, would only be seen almost exclusively in the northern states, regions north of the Mason-Dixon line. During the 1860s, the South was a region dominated by agriculture, cash crop agriculture more specifically. By 1815, cotton was the most valuable export in the U.S., and later, by the 1840s, southern cotton, the white gold, was worth more than all other exports combined. 2/3 of all the cotton in the world was being produced here, in the South. As great this was, it limited southern industrialism. It only had about 29% of the railroads and 13% of the nation's banks that would later be used to fuel the expensive Civil War. Some experimented with using slaves in manufacturing, but it was completely overrun by the profitable cotton business. The North, in comparison, by the 1860s, had 90% of all the manufacturing output, 17 times more cotton and wool textiles than the South, and 30 times the leather goods, 20 times the pig iron, and 32 times more weapons. Every time the South produced 100 guns, the North made 3,200. The North was an industrial powerhouse, with only 40% of its population in agriculture compared to the 80% in the South. It's also very little known, but even in agriculture, the North was outproducing the South. Southern agriculture was very labor intensive, while the North mechanized their farming labor. In the 1860s, the North had double the products per acre and per farmer than the slave states. The only thing halting being more profitable was the smaller amount of land for farming on the North. Besides that, the North actually produced half of the nation's corn, 80% of the nation's wheat, and 90% of the nation's oats. This eventually became a problem during the Civil War, leaving the South with a lot less food than the North, changing the tides of battle. Due to the North's industrialized landscape, immigrants were attracted, and with immigrants came urbanization. By the 1860s, 26% of the northern population lived in urban areas, growing cities like Chicago and Detroit. This in turn increased the number of factories and machinery seen in these cities. 90% of all immigrants settled in the northern states. Population of the Union was 23 million, when the population of the southern states was at 9 million, half of those being black slaves. This would later prove advantageous to the war since the Union recruited 3.5 million males throughout the course of the war compared to the 1 million Confederate soldiers. The North was able to give plenty more manpower and, because of this, win the war. Even with all these advantages, the North did not achieve the quick and painless victory it had expected. The South proved to be a formidable foe due to their stronger military tradition, more experienced men, more capable generals, which Lincoln only found through trial and error. The war was one of attrition, and the South supply lines were being cut by the North's strangling Anaconda Plan, which aimed to isolate all exports and imports the South had. In conclusion, the industrialization of the North won the Civil War. Railroads, which were abundant in the North, supplied troops, supplies, and medical aid to the front lines. Telegraph poles from the North allowed for more precise instruction and information from the Commander-in-Chief, Abraham Lincoln, and the factories proved useful in supplying the Union with weaponry and other supplies. The South eventually gave in to the effects of a war of attrition and surrendered. By the end of the war, the South was so low on supplies, they melted anything to make ammunition, including church bells. They even began enlisting the slaves, who they had always doubted their loyalty.